Amiga legal issues are resolved forever. All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
What is Amiga Corporation? Let's ask the CEO.
A real pirate's trove. The Atari ST gets a wonderful new disk resource.
Screen Cheat Elite. Two-player fun in the original Elite. Coming to a BBC Micro near you soon.
And a new Quake chapter, along with personal computer records from the 1970s, coming up on this week's show for the week of Saturday, the 15th of August, 2026.
Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
Dave, Chris, good to have you on here. I'm still Jason. And of course, to support some of the biggest stories for the month of August, we've brought in noted World War II enthusiast and Commodore PET user, Mike Battilana. Mike, welcome to This Week in Retro.
Thank you, Jason.
If you're watching the video version, there's a caption coming up that might tip you off a little bit more what Mike might be on the show for. But Mike, this being your first time in This Week in Retro, don't want to hit you too hard with Amiga stuff just yet. But you were talking a little bit before the show about going all the way back to the Commodore PET. So talk a little bit about how you got involved with the PET.
Yes, well, I was about 11 or 12, or 10, 11. My father had a PET at his company, and it was sitting on a desk unused. Basically, the reason why they bought it wasn't being fulfilled. So after a few months of it sitting there like a divine thing that nobody could touch, there was an engineer who took shifts driving us to school, and once a week it was his turn, and he knew about the PET. So he told me about some commands where like list and other things where I could see like existing programs. And that opened a new universe for me. And so I actually wrote the software that the company needed. I wrote some games that I never then played. And then I was dreaming in color at night, and they gave me a VIC-20. I exhausted the resources of that too, went back to the PET because it had more memory. I was doing little things also like with keyboard interrupt to do sort of multitasking. And then when the Amiga came out on the Byte magazine issue in August 85, I think it was, I saw it as the machine, the best hardware, the best software, dream machine. So I started 1 year before I even got one to study the Amiga in theory in the Addison Wesley and the Bantam books, and had a book on C and all of that in theory before getting.
The end result is you're now the CEO of Amiga Corporation.
Yeah, which is unexpected, really. Until 2018, I would not have thought that this could be a thing. I thought my mistakes were over, like around 97. Instead, they continued.
Well, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on. We've got lots of Amiga things to talk about coming up on the show, as well as other things. We'll talk to you about other things as well. But thank you very much for visiting us.
And Chris, do you have any score updates for anybody? That we definitely hear more enthusiasm for the opening of the show when you do have something to share in that front.
I can beat the first boss in Rainbow Island. That's as much as I'm saying.
I can beat the first boss in Rainbow Island.
Oh, shush. Everybody can beat the first boss. It just took me over a week. Let's get on with the show. I don't want to talk about it.
I believe in you. I believe in you.
So we have Mike from Amiga Corporation here on the show. This is obviously not a coincidence. We reached out to him after news broke in the run-up to the Kickstart UK Amiga Expo in Derby last weekend. Now, the key text from the August 4th announcement on Amiga.com read as follows, quote, Amiga and Commodore International Corporation have entered into a licensing agreement recognizing their respective rights. Separately, a settlement with Hyperion Entertainment BV resolves a contractual dispute and replaces its 2009 agreement with Amiga. Okay, it's going to be tough to cram 32 years of post-Commodore bankruptcy machinations into like 15 minutes on this show, but we do at least have to try because this is important news, and we appreciate Mike being here to help us sort through this. All right, reminder of who the parties are here. Commodore International Corporation, this one should be pretty simple at this point. That is the iteration of Commodore that's being run by Christian Simpson, aka Parafractic. That's the one selling the 64 Ultimates and announced the flip phone and all that kind of thing. We've been talking about them a lot over the past year plus. Check the archives. Hyperion Entertainment, we don't talk about quite as often on This Week in Retro, but the company describes itself as a Belgian-German company founded in early 1999. To quote from their site, since November of 2001, Hyperion has been actively developing AmigaOS 4.x, an almost complete rewrite for modern times of the legendary Amiga operating system, which launched the multimedia computing revolution in 1987. 1987? Anyway. Originally developed by Commodore for its line of Amiga computers, AmigaOS 4.x now runs on several PowerPC-based hardware platforms, unquote. The company currently sells AmigaOS 4.1, so that's one for PowerPC systems, as well as AmigaOS 3.2, which is still for the classic Motorola 68000 series machines as originally manufactured by Commodore and ESCOM. Earlier than 1987, by the way.
Yeah,
right.
Even I knew that.
Mike, help us out here. The easy one to answer, I hope, is who Amiga Corporation is. This is your company, yes? And you kind of alluded this to the top of the show, that this is a 2018, 2019 kind of development to acquire Amiga intellectual property assets. And today does, what is the current business today?
That's two questions in one, right? How it's 2018, 19, and what it does today. It became possible as a result of an acquisition in 2019, because the former Amiga owners, the estate of the late Dr. Penticuri, was a bit tired of the. So when it flared up again in 2018, we offered to help. That brought us closer, and unexpectedly, it led to an acquisition. So here I am again. But the Amiga company really is at the end of a long chain of title. So wraps up now all the copyrights, trademarks, and I hope more than that, because saying that Amiga is just some trademarks or copyrights, I think diminutive. So many things, technology, community. It has a complex identity also. Who was the old Amiga? Was it the Commodore one? Was it the California startup? After Amiga 30, we revisited that, giving more importance also to the original team. So in the community, like last weekend, you saw all of that. You saw Beth Richard from former Commodore. You saw Ajay Michael from the original California team. And we often meet up at these events, like the World War II veterans you mentioned before. And we would like to move this forward, of course. So we have agreements with preservation institutions, researchers, former employees. There's a lot to preserve also because Commodore was one of the first digital companies, from the VAX and the Sun machines and the VAXs they had. A lot of it is still retained in digital format, and this could lead to interesting insights about also how not only Commodore, but an advanced Commodore in the 80s and 90s worked. We have a source code history tracing back to even before AmigaOS 1.0. So I think this should be one day accessible with all the revision history. And I think we will get there. And there should be new developments. Now, with the clarity we now have with the new agreement, Hyperion, Amiga for sure will be able to continue development AmigaOS 3 and more for the 68K, which is the original Amiga CPU. And we'll continue to cooperate with Hyperion and other stakeholders for other CPUs. But my personal focus and attention now is making sure that development of 68K goes back on track, and that also the other platforms by our partners. We have these mini devices by Retro Games, you have the consoles by Blaze Entertainment, you have the streaming side with Unstream. There's really SpecNext is doing other systems. If you buy a game in one place, it should really run on the different devices, for example. But if you as a developer like to create something, commercial or not, you would like to have the certainty of a baseline of features in the OS 3, let's say the modern OS 3 for the 68K, or the fact that you can load it on the device, whether it has a floppy drive or not, as long as it has the old operating system. So there's some fragmentation, which is a priority to resolve now. For example, it's one of the many things.
And it is some of that fragmentation that I'm hoping to use this time to help people sort through, because I know that I find it very confusing because I haven't tracked it as closely as some have over the past 20 plus years. Your announcement talks about having these license agreements, including but not limited to Commodore and Hyperion. You mentioned Spectrum Next, Retro Games Limited is in there. I guess it's actually a different business that's selling the direct-to-consumer Amiga Forever and Commodore 64 Forever packages. The relationship with Simpson's Commodore, I think, is fairly clear and is spelled out in the release. I'm just going to mildly paraphrase the state of play here, that Amiga Corporation owns all the source code and binaries for the 8-bit and Amiga era software and firmware that Commodore developed and marketed. That's accurate, right?
Yes.
It's Amiga that licenses out those 8-bit assets to Commodore for the 64 Ultimate. Yes. You own the Amiga trademarks. Commodore owns the Commodore trademarks. And there's this new item that a number of people have mentioned. Amiga retains the right to use and reproduce the Commodore marks in historical and descriptive contexts, including as they appear in original software documentation notices, keyboard symbols, on-screen text, and other contexts. I was interested. Your announcement also talks about the old Commodore-Amiga branding as a name that you control, and the section that you can use those keyboard symbols. So the upshot being, Commodore won't interfere with your ability to keep the Commodore name on things like the C64 startup message, the old Commodore Amiga 1987 copyright notices and workbench. That's correct, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
To answer your question about the historical parts, there's a preservation aspect there. The reason for that, for the need for that clarification, is that there is an overlap between copyrights and trademarks. For example, the old manuals have a lot of Commodore logos. And when you want to preserve those, for example, what are you going to do? That was always a question. Do we need to remove the trademarks or not? It's one aspect that needed to be sorted out, and we're happy that we could do it all in one agreement. When I discussed these things with a preservation specialist, Dave McMurtry, you may know him from the Commodore Historical Society on Facebook. He was so happy about his. He said, it seems like the best state of things since 1994, because at last there's clarity about who can do what on the old tapes, on the old discs, on the old manuals. And that is the preservation part of the work. You had a special interest in the Commodore logo. Some licensees, when you emulate a system like, PET or C64, there's this at the bottom left, Commodore key.
Right.
You can replace it or you can keep it. So what should the approach be when you have an on-screen keyboard? We just wanted to clarify that.
Oh, okay.
And it's not that we can sell or represent that, but if it's there for historical reasons, it can be retained. So it's a lot of things, where there was an overlap between the two companies or a perceived overlap, it felt good to clarify some aspects.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that clarified, because the keycap thing, I think that sent me and some other people, speculating like, okay, so do those kind of rebranded keycaps that we see on retro games machines, could that be something that changes? But I think you clarified it's more about the historical use or an on-screen keyboard or something like that.
That's the retro games agreement predates this agreement. So, about the future, they may make their own agreements with Commodore. The manufacturing of that product line even predates the new Commodore entity.
Sure.
So everything is possible in the future. But the keycap you saw there a few years back is, in an abundance of caution, is their own.
Okay. So the Hyperion part is more confusing to me because there's so many different revision numbers of Amiga OS out there. Some of the later numbers are older than the newer numbers. Here's a quote from the release. Yes.
Am I right that the Amiga operating system went backwards? Is that what it did? Yeah.
Yes, it did. We like backwards. We are all retro, so maybe we should go back to negative numbers.
So there's this mention in here that I want to clarify what's going on. It says, the settlement agreement confirms that Hyperion Entertainment will continue to develop and distribute Amiga OS 4 under license from Amiga. So that's going to be the PowerPC version that's developed and sold so far by Hyperion. So they'll still be doing that. The part where I start getting lost is those 68,000 versions that Hyperion also develops and sells. There's 3.14, 3.2, 3.3. In any case, your announcement says distribution of those products will end no later than December 31st, 2027, so about a year and a half from now. Amiga will continue to direct the development and evolution of AmigaOS for the 68K platform, carrying forward the lineage established by Commodore Amiga in the 1980s. Hyperion Entertainment will deliver to Amiga the source code, revision history, and documentation for AmigaOS 3.1.4, including all fixes and updates, but excluding AmigaOS 4 code backported into AmigaOS 3.2 or 3.3 for use in Amiga 68K AmigaOS development. So help us out, please here, Mike. You're going to get the code for 3.1.4. Yeah.
I can help you. I can help you make the confusion more confusing.
Oh, good.
and get back to clarity. So this Hyperion settlement was signed at about draft version 40-something. Mm-hmm. It was elegant, maybe around version 10. And then until the end of June, AmigaOS 3.2 and 3.3 had a clean handover to Amiga. And then the issue of backported AmigaOS code came out as a blocking thing. And in order to be practical, there seemed to be no way out than to explicitly mention it as something that needs to be resolved later. I don't even want to say that it's necessarily blocking. I don't know how many lines that are. So somebody said 800, maybe 1,000 lines, maybe more. I don't know. I don't even think in our market, let's call it market, it's even so valuable or that it cannot be recreated. So I think that will be handled later. But yes, you mentioned the confusion in AmigaOS version numbers going backwards. You know, when I was working with Commodore, we were doing personal paint and the retargetable graphics. I remember the mess in the then version of the display database. They were already talking about 3.2 and 4.0, about when they would fix all the things post 3.1, and that time never came. Then Amiga International under Petro Tishchenko and ESCOM and Gateway, they subcontracted 3.5 and 3.9. So they had some good improvements by Heinz and Olaf and others. And sadly, that was a contract that expired after 5 years. But those parts were recovered by Hyperion and by ourselves. Then there was 3.14 and 3.2 by Hyperion. So that's when we start going backwards.
And then 3.3 coming out soon.
And there will be a 3.3. So, and also there was a 3.x. You know when Mac OS was X with the X with 10? Yes. That's when Cloanto also had a 3.x because it had the permission to do some updates, and that's the naming. That adds to the confusion, I think. So what Amiga would like to do at the end of this is release something which I think should be a free upgrade to existing 3-point-something users that replaces them all. So there should be, in my opinion, I don't know if it's doable, I think it is. I have to remain an optimist. The features that you had in 3.9, which is also confusing as a number, should be there in the next one, and so should the features that you have in 3.2 and 3.3. So I think, let me see how you react now. I think we could call it something like 3.27 or something like, the year numbering like Ubuntu
sure.
and
the Windows approach. Yeah.
So
that's
we have
a good answer. Yeah.
We have 75 more years then.
Yeah, because you're going to end up with, if you didn't do that, you'd have 3.1.5, and you then have 3.1.5 has more than 3.2, and has more than 3.3, but has some of 3.9 and some of 3.5. So 3.27. There you go. Solved.
So, in the Amiga community, some people see 3.10 as the same as 3.1. It can be confusing. But it should be at least 3.10 or higher, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so there's different thoughts.
All right.
AmigaOS 5. No.
Well, Chris, Dave, is this clear enough for you? And are either of you going to be bold enough to turn this into a 3-hour episode by asking if there'll be AmigaOS for a CPU manufactured in this millennium?
Will there be an Amiga operating system from Amiga Corporation for a current CPU?
So for you, the 68K with its high performance per cycle is not a current CPU that is good enough? Like a 6800?
I love my 060. I'll stick with my 060. That's the answer.
But we can improve that. I mean, with FPGA, and you can even do an ASIC version, you can improve it. But again, my point mentioned before remains that it should be consistent across the ecosystem. If AmigaOS embraces some new feature, which some FPGA developers thought would be helpful maybe for the web or for media playback or whatever, they should be available, not just for in one brand.
Yeah, I get that. And there's certainly if you look back at Amiga history, there are a certain number that is more than one of next generation Amigas around. There are quite a few candidates as to what the Amiga should have done after 68,000, after PowerPC, and they're not all uniform. So I get what you're saying there. That makes perfect sense. There is a question I do want to ask, and it's fine if you don't answer this, and I would be shocked if you gave me an answer to this. When are we getting an FPGA Amiga in the same way that we got a C64 Ultimate?
Well, in the hacker space, there are already FPGA implementations of the Amiga. Whether they are good enough for a mass consumer product and proper operating system support, maybe it's not exactly the same thing. But yes, I think it will come, and there will be probably more than one at some point. I think AmigaOS will support the RTG side of it, for example. So I'm answering more than you asked. And maybe next year or the year afterward, but I think it will come, yes.
Yeah, because we saw...
Right now, even the MR, some say, and you just mentioned the 68060 before, I think, the Cyclone 5 FPGA is a bit tight for having all of those features and an 060, I think. So it can get a bit expensive if you want a high end of that. And you can dream even more. Why not an ASIC? Once it gets stable enough.
Yeah, well, that's what the Neo Geo AES Plus is doing. They're doing an ASIC. Yeah,
that was a very surprising development. Yes.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I know that you met recently Christian Simpson. So I presume that you're speaking to him about licensing out to him to produce an FPGA Amiga in the same way you did the Commodore 64 Ultimate?
So, yes, it is true that we met. It was a great team building experience. We spent 3 days together, and I think it helped. Also, we will meet again this month. There is no clear vision about what exactly or when, and nor is there formal agreement about doing this. That product you mentioned came out of Gideon's Ultimate series, which I respected and knew before. There are a few FPGA projects now for the Amiga. Are they competing? Are they overlapping?
They're not the same mass market. Yeah, they're not the same mass market as someone getting Gideon's project and the keyboard and the shell and putting it together and saying, here you are, here's a ready-to-go, fantastic. The Commodore 64 is a fantastic product, a really good price. So I really hope the Amiga ends up going down that route and gives people an out-of-the-box Amiga at a fantastic price that way. So, yeah.
Well, yes, that's perception today in part of the community that it has to be at least FPGA to be real. Let's not forget also the other CPUs that exist, the ARM or RISC-V or whatever as a core, and just like Android has a Linux core, Amiga could be something like that, booting into a 68K thing, but under the hood it has something else run on a more modern CPU. if it's cycle exact, if you cannot tell the difference by testing it, is it good enough? That is a question we already asked in 97, when it was running on an alpha or a power PC.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. Or ASICs, as you said, ASICs. Yeah, ASICs. I'll take ASICs.
I like ASICs. And the microns, the scale, we don't need to do any of the modern ultra small. We can do at the level that even some research institutions do for their university students when they do their ASIC projects.
I actually don't have any questions or anything to add. I'm just really excited because obviously this kind of stuff's been going on for a long time. So, Mike, I'm really pleased with how things are sounding, and I'm just looking forward to the future direction of Amiga in all its forms. Yeah, great work, everybody involved.
Thank you, Chris. And we tried to deliver and not overpromise. This announcement, the recent announcement, could have been 2 separate announcements. Somebody said it's too long, and somebody said when they heard about other things we're working on, no, you should put these 2. So is it too long? Is it too short? Is it? We just wanted to bring some clarity about a long list of questions that had been asked. And so this news from a few days ago was very specific to cover some frequent.
Obviously, a lot of history to cover here, some nuance that we can't capture even in a slightly longer than usual feature segment. I do want to add, Hyperion has issued a statement that mirrors the information that we've been talking about with Mike. Quoting from their site, Timothy DeGroot, director of Hyperion Entertainment BV, says in a comment to the agreement, quote, "We have had the clear goal from the very beginning of our ownership to bring an end to the ongoing lawsuits that have for far too long drained energy and resources from the advancement of AmigaOS. We now look forward to completing the development of AmigaOS 3.3 and AmigaOS 4.2, there's a new one, so that the focus can return to the users and the operating system we all love. Let the fun begin," unquote. Now, as of time of recording, Commodore International does not have its own version of a news release out on this topic, so we may be hearing from them a little bit down the road. There's always next Saturday.
We are sponsored today by PCBWay. Thank you very much for sponsoring us. PCBWay.com manufacture PCBs, as you might imagine. They'll also do the pick and place. They will put the little bits on it, the bird seed on your circuit boards for you. They'll do your own design, but what you can also do there is do someone else's design. They have a shared project library that you can browse through. You can look for a specific project. You can just browse through to find something that takes your fancy. And that's what Jason's done. Did you find anything this week, Jason?
I did. There's actually a bonanza of directly this week in retro machines you may have at home projects on PCBWay this week. There's the Amstrad CPC to VGA. It is what it looks like. It is what it says. An adapter to connect your CPC to any VGA monitor that supports a vertical frequency of 15.6 kilohertz. And there's a definitive list out there. There's the Amiga A1200/A500 keyboard membrane replacement PCB. Again, pretty straightforward. It's compatible, it says, with the Mitsumi A619A and A619B models, not the Samsung dual membrane one.
They're uncommon, though, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, which is what I've got.
Serves you right.
All right. Well, Chris sideline on that particular project. Perhaps, Chris, we can interest you in the Perify 2, the Amstrad PCW Wi-Fi expansion. Got a PCW at home?
I'm no PCW.
No. All right. Well, 1 out of 3 hosts of This Week in Retro might be able to make use of the Perify 2. It's based on a Raspberry Pi Pico microcontroller board to do stuff across the Wi-Fi on your Amstrad PCW. A lot of interesting stuff every week on the shared project section over there.
So thank you very much for sponsoring us, PCBWay.com. I am a reformed pirate. When I first got my own computer, it was an Amstrad CPC, I bought my own games. I even joined the Home Computer Club, which was a subscription service. And now I think back fondly to it, choosing a game every 2 months and getting it on disc, because they were one of the few places that didn't charge a 50% premium to get the game on disc, and then choosing again in 2 months' time from the brochure that you sent out. But when I moved on to the Atari ST, well, things changed on the ST. The Atari ST famously came with the Power Pack. 20 games on, I think, 12 discs. And they weren't bad games either. They were fairly new games. But those discs looked very much like the future game ownership for most ST owners. What we got given was a pile of discs, no boxes, no plastic cases, no manuals, no keyboard overlays, no reference guides, just the discs with the names of the games on the labels. And what Atari were doing here was trying to create value for their package when they couldn't bring the cost down anymore. At the point the Power Pack came out, the technically superior Amiga was starting to come down in price with the A500 and starting to compete with the Atari. So Atari decided, let's give them a massive bundle of games to compete. And they knew that at least in the UK, it was parents that bought the ST for their children for Christmas. So they would go to the shop, or since it's the UK, they would go to the chemists or the newsagents and see the Atari ST on display with these 20 modern games, many of them arcade conversions, and know that they didn't need to buy any games for a while. They could buy this Power Pack and that was it. And that was so very true, because it led us right to something for the ST called compact discs. And these aren't the optical kind of discs. Back at the end of the 80s, those in computers weren't really thought about as a thing. Compact discs were what the Atari scene called cracked and packed games. Now, cracked just meant removing the copy protection, and packed meant that they compressed them in size so they could put one of these onto a compact menu disc with several games on it. Now, there's something that's not quite so well known about the ST that made these compact discs even better. When the original 520 ST shipped, which is the short one without the built-in disk drive, it had a single-sided drive sold along with it. A single-sided 3.5-inch drive. And then when we got the all-in-one wedges, the very familiar 520 ST-FM, if you've seen an Atari ST, it's almost certainly the ST-FM you've seen, that had the drive built in the side, and they initially had a single-sided drive, but they very, very quickly moved to double-sided discs. And in fact, when the Power Pack came out, Atari knew that they were only selling double-sided drives, so that's why they could fit 20 games onto 12 discs. But it meant that publishers still had to sell Atari ST games on single-sided discs. And eventually later they would stick a wee label saying double-sided required. But they had, for a long time, they sell them on single-sided discs to cater for people with single-sided drives. So you'd buy a game on disc and it would come on 2 discs. And you'd then go to the dodgy market, the Glasgow Barras for me, and you'd buy a disc with that game on it and another game on 1 disc, because they were able to use both sides and because they'd used compression. And in fact, because they'd used more sectors, they'd used 10 sectors or 11 sectors rather than 9. And sometimes they'd even use an extra track or 2. And they would compete on just how compressed they could make things, how much could they pack and crack onto these discs. And that's how I got almost all of my ST games. And it's how my pals got their ST games. And it's how I copied theirs and they copied mine. And sometimes we'd get our parents to drive us to someone else's house in another town so we could copy the games that were in those circles and take them back to our own circles. And it's actually how I ended up with boxes and boxes and boxes of pirate games, and how I ended up putting in bulk orders for discs to then sell them at a tiny markup so that I got 100 discs for free out of the 2,000 discs that I got delivered to my house and then distributed to other people. But the reason why I brought this all up, it's a submission from Rich 2600. It's basically a new fantastic collection of discs, not necessarily just the pirate ones, but they take the main stage, and it's very well presented. It's a new disc archive for the Atari ST. The site is fast and the search is fantastic. It's by far the best presentation that I've seen of these discs, and you can download them all very easily. You can search for the game you're looking for, and it will show you which set of pirate discs it was on. Or you can browse through the different various pirate disc collections, Medway Boys, Automation, Flame of Finland, Pompeii Pirates, and all the rest of them. I really hope this ends up being the main resource for ST fans looking for disc games. But I thought, I've got 3 Amiga experts here. Well, I have a hobbyist so well versed in Amiga, he knows it backwards. In fact, he spells his channel name Amiga backwards. I have a professional Amiga journalist, and I have the actual literal owner of the Amiga corporation here. So let me to tell me, how was it on the Amiga for you? Was it pirate menu discs? I know there's WHD load for the Amiga. In fact, there's a similar thing, Atari.8bitchip.info for the Atari ST. But is there an Amiga archive for discs? What does it mean to you, Chris?
For me, well, going back historically, it was, I wasn't a filthy pirate like yourself, Dave. It was mainly box originals from my hard-earned pocket money, birthday and Christmas presents, or, similar to you, selling my soul to the Home Computer Club and being contractually obliged to buy a game every time they sent me the catalogue. And so it was the first time I actually went to a friend of a friend's house, so I'd never met these guys before. That's the first time I saw X-Copy. That's the first time I got some pirate games, and it felt dirty, and it felt wrong, and it felt like I'd just been with some drug dealers or something. That's honestly the feeling I came away with. Like, am I going to get in trouble for ever meeting these guys? And I only ever saw them the once. And then there was a guy at school who started selling pirated games, and they often wouldn't work. And because I kind of had a couple of words with him about that, he then sold me a copy of X-Copy, and, that was the last thing I needed to buy off him, right? So that was that, but I still preferred legit boxes. In terms of repositories, I mean, I've been fortunate in terms of, I've got an Amiga 1200 and it is fully loaded via WHD load. It's got every game I could ever think of on it for the most part. But it's not perfect. That kind of setup isn't perfect. And I think we've discussed this before, but you can kind of get oversaturation. You get, what's it called? Decision paralysis. You boot it up and you don't know what to play because you've got too many choices. So I actually like to look at my shelves and almost limit myself to, okay, what have I got in a box here? And I can just boot it up via WHD load. But there's great repositories online. Every now and again, I do a search if I'm still looking for an ADF or something. And in fact, the first thing I'll test it in is Amiga Forever, which I'm a happy user of. Because, it's just easy to boot it up on my PC. Does that work? Yes, it does. And if I want to write it to disk, then I'll use Amiga Explorer, write it to disk. The PC I use under my desk has an actual RS-232 port. No USB adapter here. I've still got an actual COM header. So I just go direct RS-232 from this i5 to my Amiga 500, and off I go, write it straight to disk. Yeah, good fun.
Mike, are you aware of any particular archives where you can get all the Amiga stuff in one thing, perhaps?
Well, when I started with Amiga, there was Aminet, of course. Aminet is culturally very, very important for the Amiga. It predated a lot of things when people didn't have access to the internet. For me, UCP came late 80s. But in 85, 86, there was Aminet. This first Amiga software purchase for me was the Lattice C, which then became SAS. And it was the C compiler. And then for me, Amiga was about productivity. Don't be shocked. I never played a game on the Amiga. Well, I played Marble Madness at a friend's, but I'm not a gamer. So the games I wrote on the 8-bit systems, I got easily bored because they were too simple. But I liked that people and family said, oh, nice, you did a great job. So I liked the positive feedback, but I never found games as interesting as maybe real life or the things that you could create on the Amiga. So we wrote a paint program, a word processor, and a tool for the handicap. Those were the first Amiga applications.
I was setting you up to tell us about Amiga Forever.
Well, Amiga Forever was my second mistake in the Amiga life. My first mistake was getting that copy of Byte magazine in 1985. People. Okay, so when everything was collapsing for us software developers in the 90s, after the Commodore companies went down, and with them all the retail, the distributors and everything. So, our software at the time was bundled with every Amiga sold. So Personal Paint was bundled with every Amiga 1200, for example. We had replaced the Deluxe Paint in the bundles. And so we went from good times to very bad times. And good times, I mean better than now. When everything collapsed and we started, out of necessity, doing B2B on Windows, so we did currency solutions, other more boring things. because we had this existing good relationship, Commodore and Amiga, and there was this emerging thing called emulation, but also a crackdown on emulation. So you may remember some Japanese games companies and others associating emulation with piracy, and there were police raids and so on. And even Gateway had issued some statements about something had to be stopped. So it was a good time to do something official and legal, which we did in 97. And so Amiga Forever 1 was released in 1997 together with Amiga Explorer, networking software, and it shaped things from then onwards. And for us, also continuing into acquisition of copyrights, which Cloanto never really wanted. Cloanto only wanted to do things properly, legally. And so it was happy once I'm connecting now to the recent solution, legal case. Cloanto was happy to give it to Amiga. So no, those copyrights are into Amiga, and Amiga Forever is just a licensed project like the others by Amiga as it was in. And it will continue. I admit it is a bit confusing because here we are in the same show. I'm wearing two hats. My past is that. My present, my commitment are now much more with Amiga.
But Amiga Forever is a fantastic package. It's really not very expensive at all. It's quite cheap, and you can buy it, and it will give you all you need to start using an Amiga. If you've never played with an Amiga before, it'll give you loads of games to play with, a nice curated list. And yeah, it's a great solution. Jason, what do you think of all this?
Well, I just want to talk for a minute about the false economy of this bottom end of tech, because I don't think I really knew about the single-sided thing, that the early STs were single-sided discs and that resonated, for quite a while. But that makes sense because history shows, unless you're really deliberate about forcing people to move up, that dirt cheap entry level, we just want to have different ranges at the market. No, it's going to hold you back for far longer than you expect. I mean, the Amiga equivalent of that was everything had to accommodate, at best a 1 meg A500, single floppy, whatever. And so much stuff was so bound to that, that you really, it was difficult to make a lot of progress. So yeah, the ST market being hamstrung by that early, we'll just ship the single side drive for a little while, but it's only at the bottom of the market. It's only for a little while, baby, and there you go.
I mean, the ST, when it was released in 1985, was the corner cutting. They didn't cut corners that they shouldn't have cut, but they cut as much as they could to get the price down because it was very much competing on price. So all this comes from the Side Cartridge project, which is an expansion for the ST that does lots of things, but importantly allows you to have discs mounted. And if you would like to go and browse the library, it's open now. Atari ST Public Floppy DB, as in DB for database. So Atari ST Public Floppy DB.sidecartridge.com. Links, of course, in the show notes if you didn't catch that. On to housekeeping.
Yeah. You want to hear about a review?
Yeah, tell us about the review.
Yeah, One Bit Head sent a nice review over to Apple Podcasts, still his go-to retro podcast. I've been listening to the show since lockdown, still love the content, hosts, and delivery. Single podcast I still listen to every week. Thank you, One Bit Head. And I apologize, by the way, in my story, I forgot to mention that submission, which was originally from AmigaNews.de, was submitted to us by Kenny. It was a very nice submission. Submissions that haven't been quite as nice. There's been a lot of yelling in the comments about my hazy recollection of AmigaOS 3.1 making it to market. So let's see if we can sort this out. Can you blame anyone?
I mean, come on, it's so difficult.
Let's see if we can sort this out, because I did mistakenly remember just when 3.1 became publicly available. So let's quickly review. CD32, yes, it shipped with Kickstart 3.1, did not ship with Workbench 3.1. That's not AmigaOS 3.1, that's a push. Commodore's Amiga 4000 Tower, yes, that did ship with 3.1. My bad. The Commodore 4000 Tower is one of those blips in history that's easy to forget. There were certainly not many of them, but they did ship, and when they shipped, they had 3.1. I regret the error. Went back, traced it back. So those Villagetronic manufactured kits that I remembered them coming out later than they did. They came to market shortly after the Commodore bankruptcy. So we're talking in 94, not after the SCOM purchase, as I mistakenly remembered. So AmigaOS 3.1 upgrade kits available summer of 1994 in what appeared to be a reasonably official form. Now, notably, they were not available for every machine right away. Found the December 94 edition of Amiga World magazine. It notes there's no upgrade path at that time for the 600, and there isn't a revised Kickstart for the 1200 at that time, although you could put Workbench 3.1 on a Kickstart 3.0 machine. Mike, do you have anything to add to this lore that you remember of 3.1 coming out in that weird mid-90s period to further clarify or muddy this up?
Well, no, I remember those days, and I think those years we also met in Germany, right, Jim?
Yep.
I remember we got the Häagen-Dazs ice cream strolling through. I know that they didn't release. I think the floppy disk images were actually ready, and maybe they shipped later. But yes, the mass-produced version was by Villagetronic. I remember they had this huge printing machine at their own facilities, actually, to do the manuals. It was like a big photocopier with integrated binding. It was really, in my head, it was like several meters and tons in metric. It was really long, the whole room. And they were doing them in-house. I remember David Göhler, who wrote the manuals, and all the team at Villagetronic. And I remember also sadly some dispute about that intersected with the bankruptcy. So for a brief moment of time, it wasn't clear where payments should go or something like that. Mm-hmm. But yes, I have my Villagetronic version, and I remember also the 4000. And I remember how they removed, the SCSI, because in order to have the SCSI and the IDE, they had to remove the Workbench library from ROM, and it had to go to floppy disk, and they had to make these changes.
So it's complicated. We're doing our best, everybody.
Yeah, please remember, we're only trying our best. And a little update to the Xbox games coming back to Windows story. We talked about original Xbox games being re-released by Microsoft, and also if you own them digitally, you're getting the license automatically, but not if you have the disc. There's an alleged leak. So the document that's allegedly a leak that says they're working on Xbox 360 games coming through the same path. And that does make sense, as of course they're trying to make money from their old but gold games, and there are a lot of those on the Xbox 360.
How about some news in brief? A couple of early personal computer-generated music records have been in the news this week. 8-Bit Show and Tell put the first known recording of Bits and Bytes, Bach Binary and Boolean, a 1978 album that was generated by an Altair 8800 connected to a 3-voice synth on his YouTube channel. And he was quickly informed by a viewer of an even earlier example, the album Computer-Controlled Synthesizer Performances from a different digital composition enthusiast, which was driven by INSEE 8080. We'll link to both of those albums. They were actually pretty fun.
A new Atari ST emulator has arrived, called the Atari System Emulator, ASE. It's a step forward from Steam or Atari in terms of the quality of life things it does, like scraping the box art for games and identifying the games that you have in these compact menu discs that I talked about earlier. So I imagine that this emulator, in combination with this new website archive of these games, are a timely thing to happen together and will lead to a much better Atari ST experience. Thank you to 8-Bit Eddie for that.
Okay, Yam894 links us to a Tech Radar article on that little red nipple you get on the ThinkPads that serves as a mouse. Well, it turns out it's not red, it's magenta. It can't be red because you can't have a red thing like that. Red is reserved for power functions. So it's magenta in all of the documentation and specifications, except it's actually red. This is an article explaining how they got past the checks by lying about what color it was.
And if you don't have enough worms in your life, in your belly, the director's cut of Worms has received a new expansion nearly 30 years after its release, thanks to Duncan himself for submitting that to us. There's 40 new levels, new tools, and so forth. It is free. It is for the Amiga edition of Worms, the Director's Cut, and it is credited to the original creator, Andy Davidson. You can grab it on his site, which is worm.net, singular worm, where he calls it the future of yesterday's worms today.
Brassic Gamer doesn't want DOS to be left out. So Quake has had a new free chapter to celebrate its 30th anniversary. Alas, it's actually only available for paid versions of 2021 Quake. But I hope the new chapter called Dawn of the Machine does make its way back to the original. It should be possible to run it on source ports that can handle more detail than the original game can, but the levels would need to be pared right back in terms of the detail to be able to work natively on the original Quake. So that's a little bit of a disappointment that it's not possible to run this, that they didn't do a version that would run on the original engine.
And lastly, happy birthday to the World Wide Web. It turned 35 on August the 6th.
And apologies, I forgot to credit who put that in there. So thank you, mystery person who told us about that. I failed you there.
But if you go to reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro, you can yell at us about that.
Yeah, have a go at me. It's my fault, not Chris.
I'm not sure if we've ever mentioned it on the show before, but back in the early 80s, a miracle was born in the form of an open galaxy roaming space trading opera called Elite. Aimed at the BBC Micro originally, it used wireframe 3D graphics to immerse players in a first-person cockpit view experience unlike any other at the time. It spawned clones, ports, remakes, and copycats for, well, I'd argue right into the present day, with games like No Man's Sky and Star Citizen trying to pretend they invented the genre. But space is a very large, lonely place, and this was true in the game, which was a long, drawn-out, single-player affair. And I think many players wish there was a way, by some magic, a way of proving to your mate that you were more elite than they were by going head-to-head. I know I wished in the much later Elite 2 Frontier that could have been multiplayer, but that game used the speeding up of time to make long-distance space travel playable, so that wouldn't work across a network. Carrier Command is another one that springs to mind. I wish were two-player, but it wasn't the case. Although a very similar game, Armageddon by Psygnosis, that was link-up multiplayer. Back to Elite, though, a retro coder named Mark Moxon is aiming to release a two-player version of Elite for the original BBC Micro in September of this year, in news shared with us by Positive Bid 3029 on our Reddit. It looks to be split screen, and if you look on Mark's Blue Sky page, he's even made it so that each player can use a Twin Delta 14B joystick and all the buttons are mapped, so neither player needs to use the keyboard at all and they can go head-to-head. Looking through his page, actually, he's even done a Anaglyph 3D mod to Elite about 2 years ago, so for, the Red Scion 3D glasses. What do you think of this, guys, of Mark's Elite mods? And are there any games from back in the day that you remember wishing were two or more players back then? Jason?
Yeah, I'll address the second question first. I do remember there was some mild excitement a few years ago when people realized that the karateka or karateka, if you're fancy, code could be patched with some fairly minor adjustments to let a second player control the computer's enemies, or at least have some control over what their attacks were. And I do think there's potential in other titles to do this kind of thing, either when there's one-at-a-time foes, give another player control, or things like the rescue subgame, the second subgame in Beachhead 2, which does a really good job with just a single-button joystick, letting the player on the dictator side control 4 different, dangers that menace the guys walking across the screen on the hero side. So I do wonder if there are other control systems that might be, hacked up for a game like that. Two-player, maybe for phase-based combat games like Wizardry and Bard's Tale, for that matter, SSI Gold Box Engine, BattleTech. While we're at it, I actually would really like to see that one. As for Mark Moxon's work, his very, very carefully disassembled and documented code is what's been enabling others to create things like the original or the new Atari 8-bit and VIC-20 ports of Elite. So it's really, really cool to see others, including him, making new uses of the game engine that he has spent so much time pulling apart and putting back together.
Two-player whiz ball, please. It's so difficult to control that ball and the cat, even once you've got the power-up so you can float. Even after that, I really struggle with it. Can you imagine two of you sitting there playing whiz ball?
I thought you could, because I swear I remember playing that with my brother.
Really?
And he would. I swear. Somebody tell us in the comments. Is Whizball on the Amiga for me? Is that two-player when you can the other player control the cat? I thought they could.
I didn't know. Going back to Elite though, one of the things that happened with Elite was it was a fairly simple game under the surface, turned into something amazing thanks to the imagination gap, a phrase I haven't used for a while. And I mean the novella, the manual, and our own imagination taking the basic gameplay and turning it into something much greater. So split screen Elite would have been cool to play, and co-op versus the pirates and etc. sounds great, but it would be so difficult to play enough Elite to get to Elite in co-op with your friend being there. But I've got an idea that could have been done back in 1984 with the same idea that Elite has, just a little bit that does a lot. Why not have the game incorporate your friend's save files as sort of pseudo high scores? So you save your commander to disk, you swap that disk with your friend, they add theirs to it, other people add theirs to it, you update it, and when you're playing Elite, you load this disk in, and it gives you it gives you these pilots. You can look at a list of their Elite ratings and how many kills they've got. And also, if you visit the system that they were last seen in, you can see their ship and the loadout. And I think that would have been perfectly and easily possible on a 32 kilobyte game. And it would have added so much to the game, a little bit of depth there from not very much, and made the game much more engaging. There you go. That's my idea. I thought of it. I thought it was a cracking idea.
Mike, any thoughts?
Well, yes, I have a question for Jason, of course.
Uh-oh, what have I done?
When are you going to resurrect Amiga Report? That was my source of news.
I'm spending all of my retro energies on this show and the Retro Adventures.
Do you need a week off next week then to do an Amiga Report?
No, thank you.
He's been asked a few times, and he doesn't. He's. I think, Jason, you said that you might do a one-off special one day.
Just let it sneak up on me organically. I don't.
I was waiting for this moment. We did it with Amiga News.de, but I would have loved, and I told Jason years ago, when the moment is right, should we do it? I would have given you a 1 week advance to break the news and everybody, and you sent those LHA files or whatever they were.
Amiga Guide, LHA, yeah.
I love them. I just wanted to say I really loved them.
Very cool. This Elite mod, and in fact, even this 3D mod, because I do like Anaglyph 3D stuff, it all sounds right up my alley. We didn't really get multiplayer Elite until 2014 when Elite Dangerous came out. But what Mark is doing is not only on the original kit, but it's split screen. And I think that's a lost art over distance multiplayer gaming. This does remind... Sorry, cardboard. Yes,
cardboard dividers.
Oh, we've done cardboard. I've done RF splitters as well. So you've got two TVs and then
masking tape off the top and one in the bottom of the other.
Which is great until you have to go through a menu, right? You can only see half the menu. GoldenEye memories coming back. But anyway, what this actually does remind me of, though, seeing a wireframe split screen multiplayer game, it just instantly reminded me of the best air-to-air combat game on the Amiga for this level of fun. Nope, not Falcon, because that was Flat Shade Poly, and it used RS-232, not split screen. If you've not done so already, and you're into Amiga gaming, try Sky Chase for fast-paced wireframe split screen hilarity. The best plane in the options is the paper plane. I'm not even kidding. Brilliant game. Nobody talks about it. Fantastic game. As for this Elite mod, I love it, and I know the result for me, though, will actually be chasing a box copy of Elite for my Acorn Electron, a game I've lusted after for 42 years and counting. It's time now for our community question of the week, and last week's question was, what are your favourite Gremlin graphics games from back in the day? I believe we're out of contest mode on the subreddit, so Mike, did you want to read out the top answer from Antiques for Geeks?
Yes, so Antiques for Geeks says, Supercars 2. Much as I loved Lotus, Trailblazer, and Gauntlet, they developed it, so it counts. I spent hours hammering around the tracks, improving my car, and desperately trying to find answers to the end of level quizzes. Oh, how my heart sunk when the Cats Against the Bomb interview would go up. No penalty from that encounter seemed like a win, but most of all, playing Supercars 2 with a friend was brilliant.
Yes.
Yeah, I love Supercars too.
Dave, do you want to read out the next one?
The next one is from Elk2Mig. And he says, Lotus Turbo Challenge 1 and 2 plays those endlessly with friends. Can't actually recall if I ever played 3. Got Zool with my A1200 and was so disappointed. Didn't give it much of my time. Looking through the full list of their Amiga games, I have to say I didn't really play any of the others, which is a surprise to me because there's so many. P.S. Gremlins 2 was the better, more polished, more enjoyable film. Thank you very much.
Rubbish!
But just like T2 and their Terminator or Aliens and Alien, just because the sequel was better doesn't detract from the original being the soul of the franchise. That's a very good point. I think we can settle the argument on that.
The first one is a Christmas movie. Argue with me on that one.
Cool. Fine. It is.
Jason, do you want to hit number 3?
Well, Good Punk 2 swoops in with, I don't know why everybody hates it. I love Zool. So
Fantastic.
Enough. Fair enough.
And because there's 4 of us, we'll give Trevor Kevison, only because he's picked one of my favourite games. He said, probably Lotus 3 on the Amiga. As an ST owner, I was more than a little jealous of my Amiga owning best friend who was showing it off. Well, look, don't forget, you're 20% faster on an ST, so there you go. Fantastic. And our question for this week is, it's only an hour show. What didn't we ask Mike about Amiga that we should have? So where should they go to put those answers, Dave?
They should go to reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro to submit the answers for the question of the week this week. And we promised that Mike will not answer them.
Yeah.
Because he's finished now. He's done his sentence with us. Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to come on this show. It's been fascinating hearing your stories and hearing what's coming with Amiga. And I think you've even told us some things that perhaps no one else knows at this stage. I hope you don't mind of telling us what the next version of Amiga operating system is officially going to be called. But thank you very much, everyone.
As we improvised, there were a lot of new things for me too, including being here on the show with you for the first time.
Yeah, thanks for answering the call. I should notice.
Yeah, great experience. And I hope I don't break the entire show now by not exiting in the way you told me to exit.
Yes.
Just sit tight.
We will see you all next week. We have another guest on next week. Someone you probably remember, maybe. But we'll see you all next week.
Is that?
I'm waving.
That's
Chris is waving.
That's news. Is it?
Mike's waving. Jason's waving.
Bye.
Yeah. It's on the spreadsheet.
Is it? That's new.
Yeah. Yeah.
This Week in Retro was written and presented by Chris from 005 Agema, Jason from the Retro Adventurers, and Dave. It was edited by me, Duncan Stiles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcast app, including Apple Podcast and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/thisweekinretro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. Please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.